Here's something most Friends fans don't actually know. Ross and Rachel almost didn't end up together at all. Not almost in the small, dramatic sense of nearly missing a plane. Bigger than that. The writers seriously discussed ending the entire series without giving them a real ending. Just a vague, open maybe someday, instead of the airport, the voicemail, and the plane. No terminal, no running. Tonight, we're going to find out why they changed their minds. Along the way, we'll get into a scrap season-long storyline that would have completely changed how their reunion felt. The real reason a producer says the whole break was never supposed to happen at all. And a small confession the actors themselves didn't make public until nearly 2 decades after the finale aired. If you think you already know this story inside out, stick around anyway. Most fans don't know all of this. Hey. Welcome back to Sleepy Couch Decoded. I'm glad you're here. Maybe it's been a long day. Maybe you just wanted something familiar playing softly while you drift off. Either way, tonight we're settling into one question you already have an opinion about, whether you realize it or not. Were Ross and Rachel actually on a break? You know the line, even if you've never watched a full episode. It's leaked so far outside the show itself that people use it now in arguments that have nothing to do with Friends at all. Shouting, "We were on a break," half-jokingly at a partner over something completely unrelated, and everyone in the room somehow still gets the reference. It's one of the most quoted, most argued over moments in television history. And 20 years later, people are still doing exactly what we're about to do tonight, taking sides. But the break itself only lasts a few scenes. What we're actually tracing tonight is the entire shape of this relationship, from before either of them admitted anything, all the way to that airport gate a decade later. Stopping along the way at a few genuinely surprising turns the show almost took instead. I'm not going to tell you who was right. I don't think there's a clean answer. What I can offer you is the fuller story, gently, in order, along with the parts usually left out, so that by the end, you'll have everything you need to hold your own answer a little more comfortably. If this kind of calm, familiar storytelling helps you drift off, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps other people find their way here too. Let's start at the very beginning, because Ross's side of this story starts long before the show does. The very first night we meet these two people again as adults, Rachel comes running into Central Perk in a wedding dress, having just left her fiancé at the altar. And Ross is already there, quietly in love with her in a way that turns out to be older than either of them lets on right away. Later that night, alone with her, Ross admits he had a crush on her back in high school, a real one. Rachel, a little startled, says she knew and had always assumed he thought of her as nothing more than Monica's geeky older brother. Although he asks if it might be all right to ask her out sometime, she says that would be okay. It's easy to forget that exchange happened at all once the show speeds into 10 years of chaos. But it tells you something important before the story even starts. Ross isn't falling for Rachel in that first episode. He'd already been quietly in love with her for years. Rachel is stepping into an entirely new life that night. Homeless, jobless, freshly unmarried to a man named Barry, with no idea yet that the geeky older brother is about to become the center of the next decade of her life. What's also worth knowing, and rarely gets mentioned, is what Ross himself is carrying into that same night. He's freshly separated from his first wife, Carol, who has just told him she's gay, in love with a woman named Susan, and their marriage is over. Ross didn't do anything to lose that marriage. It simply ended, through no failure of his own that he could ever point to. Hold on to that, because so much of what later reads as jealousy or possessiveness in Ross starts to look a little different once you remember he's a man who has already once been blindsided by losing someone he loved. It's easy to watch that scene now and only see the sweetness in it. But there's a quiet asymmetry worth noticing too. One person confessing a feeling they've been sitting on for years, the other hearing about it for the very first time and simply agreeing it would be fine to try. Rachel is carrying her own quiet history into that same night too, even if the show takes longer to spell it out. She's a woman who just left a man at the altar, not out of cruelty, but because some part of her recognized, right at the last possible moment, that marrying Barry would have meant disappearing into a life chosen for her rather than by her. It's the first of several moments across the show where Rachel, faced with the relationship getting serious, feels the urge to step back rather than lean in. Not because she doesn't love the person in front of her, but because an older, more private fear about losing herself keeps surfacing at exactly the wrong times. Ross fears losing people who leave without warning. Rachel fears losing herself inside people who stay. Two people, in their own separate ways, afraid of the exact same thing, disappearing, just from opposite directions, circling each other for a decade without either of them ever quite finding the words to name it out loud. Compare this, for a second, to the other central couple the show eventually builds. Monica and Chandler get together years later, almost by accident, and spend the rest of the series as the group's steady, dependable anchor. Rarely breaking up, rarely creating the kind of drama Ross and Rachel specialize in. The show seems to understand the difference intuitively, even if it never states it outright. Monica and Chandler work because they arrive at their relationship already knowing themselves fairly well. Two adults meeting each other roughly where they already are. Ross and Rachel never get that luxury. They start dating each other while both of them are still, in very different ways, becoming the people they'll eventually be, which is exactly why their story gets to be so much messier, and exactly why it never quite settles the way Monica and Chandler's does. That mismatch, one of them already certain and holding on, the other still finding her footing, doesn't disappear once they finally become a couple. If anything, it becomes the quiet architecture underneath almost everything that happens next, and it shows up clearly in an episode fans still call simply The List. It torn between Rachel and a girlfriend named Julie, Ross writes out the pros and cons of each. It doesn't happen in some quiet, private moment either, tucked away where only the two of them would ever know about it. Rachel finds it almost by accident and reads it out loud, in front of him, her voice tightening with every line. Spoiled, ditzy, also too into her looks, and quietest of all, the one that seems to land hardest, just a waitress. A phrase that hurts especially badly coming from someone who spent the better part of a year trying to prove to herself that she can build something real out of nothing. And yet, in Ross's list for Julie, the only con he can come up with is one line. She's not Rachel. It's a strange contradiction, and it captures exactly how Ross loves throughout the whole show, evaluating out loud in ways that hurt, while never once actually being in doubt about who he wants. He tries to explain, clumsily, that it was never meant for her eyes, that a list is just a private way of thinking something through rather than a public verdict on her worth. It doesn't land. Rachel isn't angry because Ross had doubts. Almost everyone has doubts about someone they're falling for. She's hurt because he wrote them down, organized them, made them official in a way that turned her, briefly, into something to be evaluated rather than someone to be loved without an itemized asterisk attached. Their actual first fist happens outside Central Perk, late one night, rain gathering on the street outside the window. Everyone else long since gone home. In an episode called The One Where Ross Finds Out. Here's a third thing most fans don't know, one the actors themselves only confirmed years later. During the show's 2021 reunion special, Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer admitted that during that first season, they genuinely had crushes on each other in real life. Timing that never quite lined up, one of them always seeing someone else whenever the other was free. Aniston has said she once told Schwimmer it would be a real shame if the first time they ever kissed happened to be on national television. And then, sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Their actual first kiss as two people, not just as two characters, was that scene in the rain outside the coffee shop. Whatever chemistry made Ross and Rachel so believable to a decade of viewers wasn't entirely invented for the camera. Aniston has said since that whatever feelings they weren't quite ready to act on in their own lives, they simply poured into Ross and Rachel instead. Which might explain why so many of the show's quietest, most tender scenes between the two of them still feel so genuinely unguarded, even now, even on a rewatch, even once you already know exactly how the story ends. It's a strange thing to carry into the rest of tonight's story, knowing that two real people spent a decade circling their own version of will they, won't they, just off camera, while playing two characters doing the exact same thing in front of it. Not long after, Phoebe describes the two of them using an image that ends up defining their relationship for the next decade, comparing them to lobsters who fall in love and mate for life, walking around the tank holding claws. It's silly and sincere at once, and it gives the audience a soft, hopeful lens to keep using, even in the rougher years ahead. Around the same stretch of episodes, there's another piece of quiet evidence for how long Ross had actually been carrying this feeling. One many casual viewers half remember, but rarely connect to everything else. Monica, trying gently to nudge things along, digs up an old home video from Ross's senior prom and plays it for Rachel, without telling her first what's actually on the tape. It shows a 17-year-old Ross getting ready to escort Rachel to her own prom after her original date canceled at the last minute. Dressed up, visibly nervous, clearly thrilled just to have been asked to help, only for Rachel's real date to show up unannounced at the very last second and take her instead, leaving a heartbroken teenage Ross standing alone in a rented tuxedo nobody ended up needing. Watching it back as an adult, Rachel realizes in real time on Monica's living room television just how long this feeling had actually been sitting quietly inside him, unspoken and unrewarded, years before either of them had any real reason to think it would ever go anywhere at all. It's a small piece of home video proof that the crush Ross confessed in the very first episode wasn't a fresh feeling invented for one dramatic night. It had already survived one entire heartbreak a decade earlier. A heartbreak Rachel never even knew she'd caused until she sat there and watched the tape. Almost all of this, the list, the lobster speech, the kiss in the rain, plays out within a few steps of the same worn orange couch, in the same coffee house the six of them treat as neutral ground no matter what's happening between any two of them that week. Apartments change. Marriages happen and unravel. People move to London, to Vegas, eventually to Paris. Central Perk stays exactly where it is, and their friends stay sitting there too, functioning almost like a quiet, off-to-the-side jury throughout the whole relationship, reacting to each twist the way the audience at home does. Which is maybe part of why watching it back still feels less like observing two strangers and more like remembering two people you've actually known for years. Their first real relationship doesn't stay simple for long. Ross grows jealous of Rachel's male coworker Mark, watching their easy friendship with a dread he doesn't know how to voice calmly. Rachel, newly confident in a career she's building for the first time in her life, doesn't register how much her ordinary workdays are chipping at his sense of security. Neither of them is doing anything especially wrong, yet. They're just misreading each other. Ross seeing threat, where Rachel sees simple friendship. Rachel seeing overreaction, where Ross feels something closer to real fear. It's a tension that doesn't stay confined to Mark, either. It keeps resurfacing across the years, dressed a little differently each time. Later, when Rachel is offered a promotion that means longer hours, or a trip that puts her in a hotel with colleagues Ross has never met, the same old flicker of unease tends to show up in him again. Quieter now, more self-aware, but never entirely gone. Rachel, for her part, keeps building the career she started constructing from nothing back in season 1, and every step forward in it seems to arrive, at least a little, at the cost of Ross's sense of steadiness. It's the same fault line that will eventually reappear in its biggest, highest stakes form a decade later, when an entire job offer in Paris puts the two of them right back at this exact same crossroads. Only this time with a daughter, a decade of history, and far more on the line than one uneasy dinner with a coworker. That tension finally breaks open in the 15th episode of the third season, the one where Ross and Rachel take a break, a canceled anniversary dinner, a missed phone call. Ross, convinced Mark is more than a coworker, pushes until the fight cracks wide open. Rachel, exhausted, finally says she thinks they need a break, and Ross, stunned, leaves. That same night, he goes home with a coworker from the copy shop, reeling, convinced it's already over. When Rachel finds out, she's devastated, and Ross insists on the defense that would become one of the most quoted lines in television history. They were on a break. This argument doesn't happen in a vacuum either, the way it can feel like it does when you replay just the highlight clip in your head. It happens inside a friend group where everyone is tangled up in everyone else's lives, where Monica is simultaneously Ross's sister and Rachel's roommate and closest friend, where Chandler and Joey have to somehow keep living with the fallout on both sides, where Phoebe has to watch two people she genuinely loves hurt each other without an easy way to referee it. Nobody in that apartment gets the luxury of picking a side and staying comfortably in it for long. Monica, in particular, spends years quietly triangulated between the two of them, defending her brother out of instinct while comforting her best friend out of loyalty, sometimes in the same afternoon, never quite able to fully choose either without betraying the other. They all just have to keep showing up for both of them, the same way the audience at home eventually does too. Here's the first thing most fans never hear about this fight. According to the show's own producer, Kevin S. Bright, the break wasn't part of the original plan at all. The writers had intended for Ross and Rachel to finally get together and simply stay together. But once they did, the tension that made their story compelling started to flatten out, and sometime during that third season, the idea of pulling them apart took shape. Not because the story demanded it, but because the writers realized how much more alive the show became once these two were struggling instead of settled. One of the most fiercely debated moments in television history may never have existed at all in the original vision, and it wouldn't be the last time the writers seriously considered a very different fate for Ross and Rachel. There's a bigger version of that same instinct still ahead tonight, an entire storyline that made it almost all the way to the screen before it quietly didn't. One that would have changed how Emma's whole story felt once she finally arrived. We're not there yet. Hold on to that. Picture, for a second, the version of this show where that decision never got made, where Ross and Rachel simply got together in season 2 and quietly stayed together for the rest of the run. No copy shop girl, no 20 years of argument. It's hard to say whether that version would have felt more peaceful to watch or simply less alive. A couple that never got tested standing in for one that spent a decade being tested constantly. The writers chose the harder, messier road. And whether or not that choice was fair to the characters, it's the reason we're here tonight, tracing the long way around, instead of the short path that was sitting right there, briefly, before anyone decided to complicate it. Whatever the truth of that one specific night was, the show never hands you a clean verdict. And it isn't an accident. Sitcom scripts are usually built with a fairly clear sense of who the audience should root for in any given scene. Camera angles and reaction shots nudging you gently toward whoever's currently in the right. The break is one of the rare moments where the show seems to deliberately withhold that nudge, giving both of them a full, sympathetic case, and neither a clean apology. Whether that ambiguity was a careful creative choice or simply what happens when a writer's room can't agree on an answer either, the effect on the audience was the same either way. Without a clear verdict handed down from the screen, viewers had no choice but to supply their own, filling in the gap with whatever they personally believed loyalty and hurt were supposed to look like. Two people can watch the exact same scene and walk away having witnessed two entirely different arguments. each shaped as much by what they brought into the room as by what actually happened inside it. If you've ever wondered why you personally land where you do on this, here's a theory. It probably has less to do with Ross or Rachel specifically. It has more to do with what you already believe about how people are supposed to behave when they're hurt. If you tend to believe that words matter most, that a stated boundary should be honored the moment it's spoken, you likely land closer to Rachel. If you tend to believe that intent matters more than technicality, that a man reeling from what felt like a breakup shouldn't be held to the precise legal status of a relationship he believed was already over, you probably land closer to Ross. Neither instinct is wrong. They're just different, quietly inherited ways of understanding what people owe each other in the middle of getting hurt. And this one fictional argument happens to be specific enough and open-ended enough to reveal which one you carry without you ever having to say it about yourself directly. Knowing what we now know only deepens that a little further. A break that the writers never actually planned to write. A reconciliation attempt that failed not because of some plot twist, but because a tired man fell asleep reading 18 pages of someone else's heartbreak. A pregnancy storyline for another woman entirely that got quietly shelved so this exact relationship could keep feeling like fate instead of formula. An ending the creators seriously considered leaving open. And two real actors who spent a full season privately wishing they were the couple everyone was already writing them to become. None of it was inevitable. All of it, somehow, still landed like it was. Rachel's version centers on intent, a break as space, not permission. Ross's centers on the words actually spoken. An ending is an ending, whatever it's called. There's a small detail many fans point to as the crack in Rachel's version. A later conversation where she tells Monica that she and Ross had broken up. Not paused, not stepped back. She later calls it a technicality. Ross, for his part, can't quite let it go either, firing back when she claims she's over him, asking with real disbelief when exactly she was ever under him in the first place. Relationship therapists have occasionally been asked to weigh in on the scene, treating two fictional characters with real care. One noted that the break itself was never clearly defined in the moment, no agreement on what it meant or how long it would last, and that both of them appeared to be in a state called emotional flooding during the fight. A fight-or-flight response that shuts down the part of the brain responsible for careful decision-making. Rachel wasn't calculating a technicality in that state. She was trying to make an unbearable argument stop. Another expert offered a different reframe entirely, suggesting the two of them weren't really on a break for those few days in season 3. In a deeper sense, she said, they'd always been on a break. A couple who loved each other intensely, but had never built the plain, unglamorous trust that could hold them steady through something like this. The break wasn't the wound. It was just the moment the wound finally showed. If that's true, then everything that happens across the rest of this story, the 18-page letter, the rebounds, the wedding with the wrong name in it, the drunken Vegas marriage nobody quite knew how to end, is really just the slow, uneven process of two people finally building the kind of trust that could have prevented the break in the first place. If only they'd had it a few years earlier. Neither explanation makes either of them blameless, but it does make them, for a moment, less like two people locked in a permanent battle of right and wrong, and more like two tired, hurt people reacting badly at the same time for reasons that had very little to do with each other and everything to do with whatever each of them was already carrying into that apartment long before the argument even started. Public opinion never settled either. David Schwimmer has said plainly that as far as he's concerned, they were on a break. Jennifer Aniston has quietly shared memes over the years that lean the other way. Even the two actors who spent a decade inside these characters never fully lined up on an answer. Maybe that's the most honest ending the debate could ever really have. Ordinary fans still sort themselves into sides just as firmly, and have for 2 decades, long before comment sections and social media made it easy to broadcast an opinion to strangers. Ask around, even now, and most longtime viewers will tell you almost instantly whether they consider themselves Team Ross or Team Rachel, as though the two of them were rival sports franchises rather than two fictional people who, by the end of the show, chose each other anyway. It's a strange kind of loyalty to hold on to for 20 years, but it says something true about how deeply the show made its audience feel invested in a fictional relationship's internal logic, caring enough about who owed whom an apology to keep arguing about it long after every other detail of the plot has faded into comfortable nostalgia. Also, the break doesn't end things immediately, either. Not quite in the way memory usually compresses it. They actually try again almost right away, briefly reconciling early the following season, before it falls apart a second time over something almost more painful than the original fight. Rachel, still needing Ross to understand exactly how much he'd hurt her, writes him a letter explaining her side in full, 18 pages, front and back. A detail so specific it's become its own small piece of the show's folklore. Quoted by fans who couldn't tell you which season it's from but can recite the exact number of pages without thinking twice. Ross starts reading it out loud to her, earnestly, and falls asleep partway through. It's played for laughs in the moment, and it is genuinely funny. But underneath the jokes, it's the same wound as before. Ross meaning well, and still, somehow, not quite managing to give Rachel the full, patient attention she's asking for. That second collapse is the one that actually sends them apart for years, not the break itself, but the failed attempt to repair it that came right afterward. It's a small, almost throwaway detail, a man dozing off during the one document specifically written to help him finally understand her, but it fits a pattern that shows up again and again across the whole relationship. Ross wanting to fix things, wanting to be forgiven, without always managing the slower, less flattering work of simply sitting still and listening long enough to actually absorb what he'd done. Rachel, for her part, keeps writing, keeps explaining, keeps hoping that the right words, delivered clearly enough, might finally close the gap between them. Long after it's become clear that words alone were never quite going to be enough. If you tried to count, honestly, how many times Ross and Rachel broke up and found their way back to each other across the show's 10 seasons, you'd likely lose track somewhere around the 4th or 5th attempt, and you wouldn't be alone. Even longtime fans who've made spreadsheets and timelines trying to pin down an exact number tend to disagree with each other by the end of it, because so many of the smaller reconciliations blur together. A fight here, a tender moment there, never quite escalating into a full, named breakup, but never fully resolving into stability either. It became, over time, something the show itself seemed to treat with a kind of tired affection. Two people who apparently couldn't stay together and couldn't quite stay apart, orbiting each other through other relationships and other cities, always eventually drifting back into the same gravity. Real relationships rarely get edited down to their highlights. Ross and Rachel's did, again and again, which might be part of why the whole thing can feel compressed into a single evening instead of stretched across a decade. Less like a slow, believable courtship and more like one long argument with occasional breaks for tenderness. What followed was years of circling, each of them trying, in their own way, to build a life that didn't depend on the other, and neither of them quite managing it. Before Rachel moves on first, with Joshua, a client from the department store where she works, before that fizzles out too. Not long after, she starts seeing a sweet, younger man named Russ, who several of her friends can't help but notice looks strikingly, almost uncomfortably like Ross, played mostly for laughs in the show itself, but underneath the joke sits something quietly telling. The kind of detail that would feel almost too neat if it happened in a more self-serious drama.
and yet somehow still lands as true here precisely because the show plays it so lightly. Although when Rachel is actively trying to move forward, some part of her keeps circling back to the same shape of person without fully meaning to.
Later, she'll date a much younger assistant named Tag, a relationship that fizzles for reasons that have less to do with Ross and more to do with simply being at different points in life. None of it is framed as failure, so much as a woman genuinely trying to build a life that doesn't orbit one man. The same instinct that made her run from her wedding to Barry in episode 1. And it complicates any version of this story that paints Ross as the only one who couldn't move forward. Rachel spends just as many years trying on other lives, other men, other versions of herself that don't include him, and keeps, quietly, gently, failing to make any of them stick either. Ross moves on too, briefly, with a woman named Bonnie. A relationship that doesn't last much beyond a few episodes before Ross, prompted by his own guilt and Rachel's lingering feelings, ends things. Later, in London for a work trip, he meets and falls for a woman named Emily. Their romance moves fast, ending in a proposal and a wedding, and it genuinely looks, for a while, like Ross has built a life that doesn't include Rachel at its center anymore. Bonnie deserves a longer pause than the show itself gives her, because the way that relationship ends says almost as much about Ross as anything that happens with Rachel directly. He doesn't end things with Bonnie because he's stopped caring for her. He ends it because he can see, plainly, that Rachel is quietly hurting every time she has to watch the two of them together. And rather than let that keep happening in the background of every group dinner, he chooses to step back from something that was, by most measures, working out fairly well. It's a small, easy-to-miss kindness tucked into the middle of a relationship history that gets remembered mostly for its messier chapters. A reminder that whatever Ross's flaws turn out to be across the rest of this story, thoughtlessness toward Rachel's feelings usually isn't one of them, even in the years when the two of them aren't together at all. And then comes one of the most quietly devastating moments in the series. Picture the room for a second. A quiet English chapel, rows of unfamiliar relatives, Emily radiant and certain in her dress. Half the friend group flown in from New York and tucked awkwardly into pews they don't quite belong in. Ross's own parents watching from somewhere near the front, unaware of what's about to happen any more than anyone else in the room is. Everything about the moment is built for one specific name. And Ross, who has spent the whole show proving himself careful, deliberate, a man who makes lists precisely so he doesn't get things wrong, gets the single most important word of the ceremony wrong in front of everyone he knows. Standing at the altar, mid-vow, he begins, "I, Ross, take thee," and says the wrong name. Not Emily, Rachel, in front of the entire wedding party, in front of Emily herself. Here's the part fans usually skip past. In the aftermath, Emily agrees to try to save the marriage on exactly one condition: that Ross cut Rachel out of his life completely. No calls, no visits, nothing. Ross actually agrees and genuinely tries for a while. It doesn't hold. Rachel is too woven into the rest of his life, into the same friend group, the same apartment building, the same worn orange couch they've all been sitting on for years, to simply be edited out on request, and Ross eventually realizes he isn't willing to make her disappear, just to prove a point to Emily. It's easy to read that decision as one more piece of evidence that Ross was never really over Rachel at all. It's also fair to read it as something a little less damning. A man refusing to sever a real, decade-old friendship on command, even at real cost to himself. Emily isn't written as a villain for asking, either. Her side of this deserves a moment too, since the show mostly moves past her once she served her purpose in Ross and Rachel's story. She watched her new husband say another woman's name at their own wedding and wanted some kind of proof that he'd chosen her. It's a sad, Understandable request, neither of them could actually make work. And the marriage ends not in one dramatic blow-up, but in that same slow, quiet way so many of Ross's relationships seem to end. Both people wanting something reasonable that simply couldn't coexist with everything else already in the picture.
If your eyes are already getting heavy right here, that's all right. That's exactly what this is for, and there's no need to fight it. But if you're still awake, stay with me a little longer, because the biggest surprise of tonight, the one about a whole storyline that almost made it to air and quietly never did, is only a few minutes away now. Years pass this way, the two of them circling each other at group dinners and holidays, sometimes warm, sometimes tense, never quite landing on anything solid. Not long after, on a trip meant to be nothing more than a fun, chaotic weekend away with the group, Ross and Rachel end up drunk together late one night on the Las Vegas Strip, laughing too hard at nothing in particular, the way people do when the night has gone on a little too long. And somewhere in that blur, impulsively, they get married. Rachel wants it annulled immediately.
Ross agrees, then quietly never does it, dreading what a third failed marriage would say about him, and lets Rachel believe it's handled when it isn't. It's the kind of small, human lie that rarely survives being found out, and when it is, it reads to Rachel less like a harmless delay and more like the same old pattern, Ross managing his own fear privately instead of trusting her with it. By this point in the show, Ross's third divorce has become something close to a running joke among the friend group, and it's easy to see why fans on the more skeptical side of the debate reach for this pattern first, almost like supporting evidence in a case file. Proof that whatever happened in Season 3 wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but part of something larger and more consistent about how Ross handles fear. It's just as easy to look at the same pattern and see something more sympathetic underneath it. A man who keeps trying, sincerely, imperfectly, rather than giving up on the idea of lasting partnership after the first one ended so painfully and through no fault of his own. 3 marriages by his mid-30s is either a red flag or proof of plain persistence, depending entirely on which detail you weigh more heavily, how they ended, or the simple fact that he kept choosing to try again anyway. By the time Ross and Rachel finally stand in front of a judge, the annulment is denied outright given their history together, and they're forced into an actual divorce. No shouting, no dramatic reveal, just a stranger behind a desk confirming in plain legal language what both of them had probably already understood separately. Here's the reveal we've been building towards since the very start of tonight. The second thing most fans genuinely don't know. I'll be honest, when I first came across this in an old interview, I had to read it twice to be sure it wasn't just fan speculation. It's real, and it changes how you should think about everything that happens next. Late in Season 6, the writers had a real cliffhanger planned for the finale involving Ross's girlfriend at the time, a much younger woman named Elizabeth. The plan was for her to announce she was pregnant, setting up an entire season built around Ross navigating an unplanned baby with someone new. It got as far as serious discussion in the writers' room before it was scrapped, mainly because it would have meant Ross fathering children with multiple different women in quick succession, which felt repetitive rather than meaningful. Both think about what that would have done to everything that follows. If Ross had already been through an unexpected pregnancy scare with someone else just one season earlier, the eventual moment with Rachel, the one that produces Emma, would have landed as one more repeat of an old pattern instead of the singular, fate-charged turn the show needed it to feel like. It's a strange thing to sit with, that an entire alternate season of Friends briefly existed in outline form, one where Ross spends a year dealing with a baby that, as the plan went, ultimately wasn't even his, before the writers quietly decided that storyline complicated more than it added, and let it go. An entire scrap season
Deciding not to exist is part of why Emma's story gets to feel as inevitable as it does.
Here's why so few fans know about this one, compared to something like The Copy Shop Girl or The Wedding Vow Slip. Those moments made it on a screen, replayed in reruns and clip compilations for 20 years, worn smooth by repetition into something close to folklore. The Elizabeth pregnancy cliffhanger never aired at all. It existed only inside a writer's room, discussed, and abandoned before a single frame of it was ever filmed, which means the only way to know about it now is through the same kind of interview and retrospective digging that this whole night story has been quietly built from. Somewhere in a studio archive, there's a version of season 7 that nobody watching at home ever got to see. An entire year of television that simply stopped existing the moment somebody in that room said, "Actually, let's not."
Because that's what happens instead. Then, almost by accident, everything shifts again. At Monica and Chandler's wedding, late in the night, surrounded by music and champagne and the particular emotional openness a wedding tends to stir up in everyone standing near it, Ross and Rachel end up together once. After years of unfinished business, a moment neither fully plans. Neither of them realizes right away just how significant that single night is about to become. Months later, Rachel discovers she's pregnant, unplanned, at a point where neither is dating the other at all. During the pregnancy, in a storyline that unfolds slowly and gently over several episodes, Joey, sincere in his own clumsy way, spends more and more time caring for Rachel as her due date approaches. And somewhere in all that ordinary caretaking, genuinely falls for her. He tells her he loves her. Plainly. The same way Ross eventually will years later at the airport. She doesn't feel the same way back. And to the show's credit, it doesn't punish Joey for the confession or turn it into a lasting rift between the two friends. They stay close, a little awkward for a while, then simply themselves again. But it's a real, meaningful reminder tucked into the middle of this story that Ross was never the only person in the world capable of looking at Rachel and genuinely loving what he saw, and that her path back to him wasn't quite as inevitable in the moment as it tends to look once you already know how the story ends. Their daughter, Emma, arrives in season 8. In a delivery room scene that's chaotic in exactly the way the show usually is, nearly the entire friend group crowded into the hallway. Timing gags stacked one on top of another. Underneath all of it sits one quieter image. Ross, who has done this once before with Carol, under very different, more distant circumstances, finally holding a newborn daughter alongside the one person who has been there for nearly every major turn of his adult life, whether either of them ever planned for it to work out that way. Something shifts after that. The old urgency and jealousy give way to something steadier, built less around passion and more around simply showing up. Late nights trading off who gets up when she cries, ordinary conversations about pediatrician appointments that somehow do more to rebuild trust than any grand gesture. There's no single episode where you could point and say, this is the moment they became safe with each other again. It happens the way real repair usually does, in small increments, easy to miss if you're only watching for the big, dramatic beats the show is usually known for. By season 9, the two of them are living, almost accidentally, back in each other's daily orbit, sharing custody, spending more ordinary time together than either has in years, and neither seems especially eager to disrupt whatever fragile, comfortable rhythm they've found. It's a quieter kind of intimacy than the show gave them in its earlier seasons, built less around butterflies and more around the specific comfort of knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee. They're still technically not together during most of this stretch. Still cautious, still a little scarred from everything that came before. But the friend group around them, the same worn couch, the same coffee shop, the same low table, keeps quietly holding space for whatever they're slowly becoming again, the way it always has. By the 10th and final season,
Rachel is offered a real, life-changing job with Louis Vuitton in Paris, and the offer comes in one last small, quiet piece of symmetry from Mark, the very same coworker whose easy friendship with Rachel set off Ross's jealousy all the way back in season 3 and helped trigger the fight that led to the break in the first place. A decade later, the same man is the one handing Rachel the biggest opportunity of her career, this time with absolutely nothing to do with Ross at all, just an old professional acquaintance who happened to remember her talent and think of her when a real opportunity opened up. It's the kind of detail the show never draws attention to directly, easy to miss entirely on a casual watch. But it quietly closes a loop that started with one uneasy dinner years earlier. The same friendship that once nearly ended things between Ross and Rachel, now, indirectly, becoming the very thing that almost ends them again, for entirely different, far more grown-up reasons. It's the kind of chance she might have taken without a second thought back in season 1, when nothing tied her to New York at all. Now there's Emma. There's a decade of history. There's a version of love that finally looks like patience instead of urgency. Ross's first instinct, tellingly, isn't to say anything about his feelings at all. It's to solve the problem the way the old list-making Ross always would have, quietly arranging for Rachel to get a raise and a promotion at her current job in New York, hoping a better offer at home might be enough to make Paris less tempting on paper. It doesn't work. And it isn't supposed to. Not really. Because the problem was never actually about the numbers on an offer letter. She decides to take the Paris job anyway. And it's only then that Ross finally does the one thing his earlier list-making self might never have managed. He doesn't weigh it. He doesn't write anything down. A crowded departure terminal, fluorescent light, the ordinary chaos of strangers dragging suitcases past a man about to say the truest thing he's said in 10 years. He finds her at the gate, out of breath, and tells her, plainly, without a single caveat attached, that he loves her and doesn't want her to go. No columns, no weighing, just the plain fact of it. Finally spoken instead of calculated. Then she gets on the plane anyway. Ross goes home, certain he's lost her for good, and checks his messages out of habit more than hope. There's one from Rachel, recorded from her seat, growing more emotional as it goes, until she's audibly begging a flight attendant to let her off before the plane leaves the gate, insisting over and over that she loves him too. It cuts off before it resolves, swallowed by static, half an answer and nothing else. He calls out into the empty apartment anyway, asking if she actually got off the plane, as if the room itself might answer him. And from right behind him, quietly, she does. I got off the plane. No swelling music, just two people, finally choosing to stay in the same room. Notice how far each of them has traveled to arrive at that one small sentence. This Ross doesn't need a written list to feel sure enough to say what he feels. He just says the truest thing he knows, out loud, with no guarantee at all that it will work. This Rachel isn't running from a wedding, chasing some vague, undefined idea of freedom anymore. She's choosing, deliberately, with a decade of self-knowledge behind her, exactly what she wants, and walking back toward it instead of away. Neither of them needed to become a different person to get here. They just needed enough time and enough missteps to finally catch up to how they'd always felt underneath everything else. Not long after, the show gives the whole group one last quiet scene together, the 6 of them leaving the empty apartment for the final time. Someone suggesting they get one last cup of coffee before they go, and someone else asking, gently, where? It's a small joke and a small ache folded into the same line. The ordinary next step of an ordinary day, standing in for the fact that this particular chapter, after everything, is finally simply over. Which brings us back to where we started tonight. Remember? The writers seriously discussed not giving them this ending at all. Co-creator David Crane has said they talked about a much vaguer finish instead. Ross and Rachel not officially together, just a hint that they might find their way there eventually, sometime after the camera stopped rolling. It probably would have felt more sophisticated on paper, but the writers ultimately decided against it, reasoning that after a decade of genuine investment from the audience, a coy, open-ended shrug wasn't the ending this particular story had earned. If we're going to do it, they decided, let's actually do it. So instead of a vague maybe, we got a terminal, a voicemail, and one very plain sentence. They almost didn't manage to keep it a surprise either. The creators have since admitted that parts of the finale script leaked before it ever aired, confirming publicly that Ross and Rachel would end up together days ahead of broadcast. Marta Kaufman has called it frustrating and has said, with a laugh, that they always suspected it was something close to an inside job, one of a small numbered set of scripts finding its way out through someone they never fully identified, turning the final weeks before the finale into their own quiet, unresolved little mystery, on top of the one they'd spent 10 years building for the audience. Knowing how close we came to never getting that scene at all, and how close the ending came to being spoiled before anyone even sat down to watch it, makes the moment land a little differently the second time through. Not everyone has been fully satisfied with the choice they landed on, either. This belongs in tonight's story too. Not swept past. Some critics and fans, revisiting the finale years later, have argued that Rachel giving up a genuinely rare, hard-earned career opportunity to stay in New York quietly undercuts the entire decade of growth her character spent building. A woman who started the show with no job at all and ends it choosing love over the exact kind of independence she'd worked so hard to earn. Others push back on that reading entirely, pointing out that choosing a person isn't the same as losing yourself, and that Rachel getting off that plane was never framed as her giving anything up, so much as her finally getting to want both things at once and refusing to pretend she didn't. It's one more version of the same argument we've been having all night, just relocated to the very last scene instead of the very first fight. And once again, the show doesn't hand you a verdict so much as two entirely reasonable ways of watching the exact same 5 words. Why has this argument in particular outlived almost everything else about the show? Most of Friends has softened into fond, general nostalgia, the specific edges worn smooth the way old memories tend to be. The break hasn't. Every year, around the show's anniversary, new viewers discover it on streaming and land, wide-eyed, on the exact same fight their parents once argued about at school. An entire new generation encountering the copy shop girl and the phrase, "We were on a break," for the very first time, decades after the actual broadcast, and somehow arriving at the exact same split, the exact same instinctive certainty about who was right, without ever having watched it live or heard the surrounding cultural conversation from back then at all. Other people who have never seen a single other episode can still tell you, with total confidence, exactly which side they're on, sometimes quoting the line back word for word without remembering the character's last name. Part of it is simple arithmetic. Friends ran for 10 years and 236 episodes, which means an audience watching in real time spent the better part of a decade slowly falling for these two people alongside them, long enough for a single argument to accumulate the emotional weight of something that happened to people they actually knew. You don't get that kind of investment from a 2-hour film. It takes years of small, ordinary Thursday nights, watching two people almost get it right, then almost get it wrong, until their timing starts to feel less like a plot and more like a fact of life you've been living alongside. The way you might quietly track the ups and downs of a real friend's relationship over drinks every few months. Half invested, half just glad to be kept in a loop. Think, for a moment, about how differently this argument might have aged if the show had simply given Ross and Rachel a tidier road to each other, the version we pictured briefly earlier. Together by season 2 and quietly stable ever after, nobody memorizes the plain, uneventful chapters of a love story. Nobody builds 20 years of dinner table debate around a couple who never really struggled. It's precisely because the writers chose the harder, messier version, a break that was never supposed to happen, a scrap pregnancy storyline, 3 marriages, 1 wrong name at an altar, that there was ever enough friction here for an audience to keep turning over in their hands for 2 decades afterward. Smooth stories get admired. Messy, believable ones get argued about at 2 in the morning by people who've never even discussed the finale of any other show that way. But maybe it also endures because it isn't really a plot point at all, arriving once and then receding into memory. It functions less like a plot and more like a Rorschach test, the same handful of scenes read back to you slightly differently depending entirely on what you bring into the room. It's a genuinely ambiguous piece of human behavior dressed up in a sitcom, and ambiguous things don't resolve the way stories usually do. They just sit there, quietly unfinished, waiting for whoever's watching to bring their own experience to the gap and fill it in. In 2021, the 6 original cast members returned to the actual soundstage where the show had been filmed for a reunion special, stepping back onto a recreation of the original sets for the first time since the series finale nearly 2 decades earlier. Aniston and Schwimmer's old crush finally became public knowledge, but the special was full of other quiet, unguarded moments too. The 6 of them sitting together, revisiting old memories, occasionally emotional in ways that felt entirely unplanned rather than staged for cameras. Nobody involved tried to relitigate the break specifically that night. Not really. But watching 6 people who spent a decade of their real lives inside these characters sit together one more time, a little older, a little more candid than the show itself ever allowed them to be, adds its own quiet weight to everything we've talked about tonight. The argument may never fully resolve. The people who lived inside it, at least for one afternoon, got to simply sit together and remember it instead. So we've come full circle on everything promised at the start of tonight. The scrap storyline that would have quietly changed how Emma's arrival felt. The producers reveal that the entire break was never part of the original plan at all. The small, private confession 2 actors didn't make public until nearly 2 decades after the cameras stopped rolling. And the ending itself, nearly left deliberately unresolved, before the people who built these 2 characters decided that a decade of investment deserved something more definite than a shrug. So here we are, right back where we started. Was Ross wrong to move on so quickly? Or was Rachel wrong to call it a break at all if she never meant it that way? Was any of it really about one night? Or was it always about 2 people loving each other in different rhythms? One carrying a quiet crush since high school, the other still learning who she was, slowly, unevenly, across a decade of almost, catching up to the same pace. I don't think tonight is the night you need a final verdict. And I'm not sure the show ever wanted you to have one. Maybe the reason this argument has lasted 20 years isn't that the answer is hidden somewhere nobody's looked hard enough. Maybe it's simply that everyone who's ever loved someone imperfectly, everyone who's ever said the wrong thing in the middle of being hurt, everyone who's ever needed a little more time than the other person was willing to give them, recognizes a piece of themselves in one side of that fight or the other. Maybe you already know, quietly, which side you've always leaned toward. And maybe that says a little something about you too, about how you love, about what you need from the people who love you back, if you're willing to sit with it for a moment before you drift off. There's no real prize for picking the correct side of this argument, and no one's actually keeping score, whatever 20 years of dinner table debates might sometimes make it feel like. Ross and Rachel aren't real people waiting on your verdict to feel resolved. They already got their ending, plain, voicemail, and all, long before you or anyone else weighed in on whose fault the break really was. So wherever you land, or if you never quite land anywhere, that's all right. Two lobsters found their way to holding clause in the end, in a version of the ending the writers almost didn't give them at all. The rest, tonight, doesn't need to be decided. There's a small comfort in knowing that even two people who loved each other as messily and as long as Ross and Rachel did eventually found their way to something steady, not because either of them became perfect, not because the list ever fully disappeared, or the jealousy, or the fear of losing themselves inside someone else, but simply because, given enough time, and enough small, unremarkable days spent quietly showing up for one another, two people who kept missing each other's timing finally caught up. And not because a scrap storyline never got the chance to complicate things, because a break was invented purely for better television, not because two actors happened to be quietly falling for each other off camera the whole time. Just because, underneath every fortunate accident and every writer's room decision, two fictional people kept choosing each other, one imperfect attempt after another, until one of those attempts finally held. That's a gentler thought to fall asleep on than any verdict could ever be. If you ever go back and rewatch the show from the beginning, knowing everything you know now, see if you can spot that first quiet confession again. A nervous man in a coffee shop admitting to a crush he'd been carrying since high school, years before either of them had any idea how long and how complicated the road ahead would turn out to be. It plays so small the first time through that it's easy to miss entirely. Watched again, with the whole story sitting behind it, it's almost unbearably tender. The first quiet domino in a chain that took 10 years, one scrapped storyline, several other marriages, one very memorable break, an 18-page letter nobody finished reading out loud, and a plane at an airport gate to finally, fully fall. And maybe watch that same early scene once more, knowing now that the two people playing it were quietly circling the exact same feeling in real life, years before either of them would admit it publicly. It doesn't change a single word of the dialogue, it just adds one more soft layer underneath something that already didn't need any help feeling tender in the first place. Somewhere out there tonight, right now, someone else is almost certainly having this exact same argument out loud, at a dinner table or in a group chat, voices rising a little the way they always do whenever this particular topic comes up. Let them have it. You've already sat through the whole story, slower and gentler than most people ever bother to, all the way back to a scrap storyline that never made it to air. A real crush two actors kept quiet about for almost 20 years, and an ending that almost got left open on purpose. You're allowed to simply let your side of it stay quiet, private, unshared, tucked away somewhere warm while everyone else keeps arguing without you. There's no comment section here, no group chat waiting for your take. Just you and the couch, and whichever answer you've quietly been carrying this whole time. There's something a little funny, actually, about how personally people take this particular fictional argument, if you stop to think about it. Nobody spends 20 years passionately defending whether Chandler should have taken that job in Tulsa, or whether Joey really should have kept the foosball table instead of the television. But mention the break, even now, to someone who hasn't thought about the show in years, and you'll usually get an immediate, almost reflexive answer, usually traced back to something in their own life, a relationship of their own where the lines got blurry in exactly the same way. That's usually a sign a piece of fiction has done something a little more interesting than just entertain you. It's found the specific soft spot where your own experience lives and quietly pressed on it. Thank you for spending this time here with me. Through a wedding dress in a coffee shop doorway, an old prom video nobody expected to matter, a con list read back in a hurt voice, a wedding vow with the wrong name in it, a storyline that got quietly scrapped before it could ever complicate things, a voicemail that cut off too soon, and one very small, very plain sentence spoken from behind someone's shoulder. If it helped you feel a little more settled, that's really all this was ever meant to do. If you're still awake, feel free to let the next episode play on, quietly, in the background. No need to keep watching if your eyes are already heavy. And if you'd like more calm, familiar stories like this one to drift off to, consider subscribing. There's always another episode waiting, whenever you're ready for it. Good night.